Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McKusick, and we're doing the first of our season review podcast today. We're going to look at the defensive line and their performance for the year. Obviously, the house is burning in a number of ways in terms of the coaching search and whatnot, so we'll be following that closely over the next couple of weeks. But joining me to talk about the defensive line and performance in 25 and what's going on for 26 as well is Brandon Croxton. Brandon, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Ken. How are you?
Can't complain at all. You're the guy I want to talk defensive line with. Not a great health year in 2025 with Nmandi Madubuike being the biggest single problem there. Lost for the year after just 98 snaps. Future very much in question. I haven't heard anything specific about it yet, particularly about retirement.
Yeah, last I think in 2023, the Ravens had all five of their defensive linemen play every single snap for the entire year.
Yep.
And unfortunately, this year they actually had 9 different players play on the defensive line. So health was a big issue, starting with Nmandi Madubuike. Just horrible, whatever injury this is. It obviously ended his season after, like 3 games. And there's a lot of questions going on about whether he's going to have to retire because of this injury or, what's going to happen. It's disappointing. Obviously, you hope all the best for him. You want to see him, be able to come back and just hopefully just live a long life with whatever this injury is and just recover that. And then after that, if he's able to come back and play football, that would be great as well. But yeah, it's going to be a pretty big gut punch if he's forced to retire because of this injury.
Yeah, it's a you should worry about the person first, of course. I have the same feelings about Nmandi and wanting to see that he lives a normal life, that he is not debilitated in some way by this. We did see Zach Orr retire for a neck injury also. It was something apparently that he was very fortunate to find before it hurt him. And I hope that that's not what Nmandi has, but if it is, then wish him the best in whatever future endeavors he's got in life. And the Ravens have to deal with the cap consequences of what's going on, probably in either case. I mean, it doesn't seem like things are going to get better. But anyway, the team reverted this year to more use of light packages. They dropped from 2.26 defensive linemen per play in 24 to 2.04 in 25. A lot of that was moving back to more outside linebackers kicked inside on passing downs. So that included a bunch of dime snaps to just one defensive lineman, and probably also a lower reliance on the base defense, more on big nickel. And when you have a nickel like Kyle Hamilton, you have less need for more tackling assets at the line of scrimmage.
Right, exactly. Yeah. I think it was probably a combination of, both just kind of a scheme adjustment, adjusting without Madubuike and, the trade in the season to be able to move Kyle up to the line of scrimmage more. But it also kind of came, just because of the skill of the players that they had after Madubuike was injured. One of my kind of big criticisms over the last couple of years is they have devoted very few resources to the position. They've only, in the last 3 years, the only draft pick they've used is on Aeneas Peebles, who's a 6th-round pick from last year. And I'm sure we'll talk a lot about him later, but he was inactive for pretty much like the last 10 or 12 games of the season. So, you've gotten older in the position, and when you get older, you get more injured, and you also see skill decline as well. And I think it's something that they're really going to have to invest in the future.
But, I think we're totally on board on the same page on that. They played a lot of the season with 4 nose tackles. This to me was part of how Orr succeeded in 2025, even though obviously it wasn't a great year overall, and Orr is now officially out as of today, in terms of his, as official as you can make it. His Instagram now says that he's looking forward to the next challenge. He's deleted Ravens from it. So
Mhm.
We didn't expect that he would be here for the next head coach. We obviously expected that he'd bring his own staff and whatnot, but apparently the Ravens have let him go in the process here. But I thought one of the things that he did well was adapt to some very bad circumstances, and obviously when you lose Madubuike and you don't really have a penetrating three tech who's functional, and I think that was probably the case with Aeneas Peebles, is that he just wasn't ready physically to play. We certainly wasn't ready to play on early downs, which was a significant problem. So they had to find other solutions, and they used four nose tackles for some games. The size of these guys is I don't think ever been duplicated before on an NFL team. And he did a good job, at least establishing a good run defense. But the Ravens are hurt in terms of pressure, in terms of what they got. They had one other gain from it though. I thought was that we really Travis Jones became much more of a player than what the Ravens had done, and some of that was this unconventional usage of him at three tech when paired with players like John Jenkins or other nose tackles.
Right, exactly. Yeah, like I think you really have to give credit to Zach Orr. I think he's been a really pretty good problem solver when things that may or may not have been question marks going into the season, and being able to work through and kind of figure out solutions to problems that are going on through the season. And this is the 3 and 4 nose tackles, which is every buffet's worst nightmare. Is Yeah, they come in and they're excellent against the run. They allowed Roquan to really flow easily to the ball carriers, and they made a very formidable run defense. But you also sacrifice pass with that. And to fit down guys. Travis Jones, we'll talk a lot more. He's really emerged as a really good pass rusher, but the rest of the guys are just space eaters. And
Mhm.
yeah,
Literally and figuratively, but yes, it's
yeah,
Nmandi Madubuike. Let's start on some of the individual players here. Played 102 snaps over the first 2 weeks before he was lost to injury. The future is really not known, as we talked about it. One of the things that's very troubling about this, and I noticed this syntax with other players, is John Harbaugh has said he can't give any more detail on the injuries due to HIPAA regulations, and he has this way of turning over to Chad Steele, who's usually watching the coach's interview, that we can't say anything about it with HIPAA, right? Because he's trying to basically tell the reporters that he's not allowed to say anything about it. But that doesn't sound like good news at all in terms of what the notion is. He'll talk about there being a lot of activity and things are happening, but he doesn't want to. He knows he can't get into it. So I've seen syntax like that used when he talks about letting the player tell you about it, and that's one thing he's had to say with Nande. The last time I heard that language, or one of the last times I heard that language, was when Steve Smith was retiring, and he wanted to let Steve Smith be the one to tell us about the retirement kind of thing.
right. Yeah, I think last year it might have been with Michael Pierce as well. He said
Yeah,
he even though it wasn't injury related, he basically mentioned Michael Pierce will say
till the
something
end.
or about his future or something like that. But yeah, I mean, you can kind of gather, if a player is lost for the season for due to injury, but that he knows that they're coming back, he'll usually say, "Yeah, I expect so and so to be back and
Mhm.
back to 100% by training camp or by midseason or whatever the severity of the injury is." The fact that he has not said that at all and is just kind of hinting like we'll let Matabike kind of talk about that or in his own time really kind of leads you to believe that it's not going in the direction that we want it to.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So, well, let's move on. John Jenkins signed a 1-year deal last year. He was 36 years old in 2025, and he played well in 523 snaps. One thing about John Jenkins is he just come off the two heaviest snap burden workload seasons of his career at age 34 and 35, I guess. Maybe it's 33 and 34, but whichever it was, they were the highest snap counts of a season, and he logged the fourth highest with the Ravens this year with 523 snaps.
Yeah, he's been a solid player. I think he's given exactly what you could expect of him. I mean, an aging player, but he's been a really good run defender. He added a little bit of pass rushing juice, although he's 350 pounds. Can't ask for much. But he's an inexpensive player. They signed him to an extension going into next year, so he'll be 37, and it's a very inexpensive deal. So it's one where I think his incentive of not coming in at 380 or 400 like Michael Pierce would do sometimes, it's right there. So none of his money is guaranteed, so he can the Ravens would be able to move on if he were to come into camp out of shape. But he was he provided a good, this is exactly what you want from John Jenkins.
And it's unusual for a player that age to basically duplicate what he done the prior season. You could even argue he played better with the Ravens than he did in Oakland. And it's very unusual at that age that you get exactly what you expect from a player. The only surprise you're going to get is a big negative surprise. And it's other than if your expectations are already regauged to expect decline from age, you get this kind of a positive surprise, which is, it's mild, but it's certainly good in terms of getting a cheap player at this point in his career. Thought very effective pairing with Travis Jones. John Jenkins gets some penetration individually, and obviously Travis Jones can't be blocked one-on-one, which is really nice. You'd like to have that pairing where they have to make a 3-to-make-2 decision on how they want to block that up.
Right. Yep. Exactly. Yeah.
Still a solid run defender. One of the things I like is his pad level is good. And, you don't always see that. But the older players who still play well late into their career, it's very frequently about pad level, and their leverage play is something they don't lose on. It's part of their craft that they can be good at. And he had a lot of great walk back pressures this year. He wasn't finishing very often. He wasn't getting quarterback hits or sacks. I think he did have one sack this year, but I'm not even sure if he had another quarterback hit other than that. But he's getting into the cone, and you get into the cone in the middle. You always hear the announcers talk about that's the worst kind of pressure for a quarterback.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. A little underrated as a pass rusher we talked about. The highlight of his season was a sack in week 6 against the Rams. One of the things that was true of Jenkins early in the season, I noted this in camp, was that he was getting a lot of time on the stationary bike. He and Okoye both got that treatment during camp. And I think it was like being a little winded too quickly was fairly frustrating to Harbaugh or the other coaches. It may have been Harbaugh, it may not have been. But they had them on the bike, and I don't think that's ever really a good thing to see guys like spending a lot of time on the bike. But we didn't notice that with Jason Jones. And yet these are the two guys who the Ravens obviously banked on as the season went on.
Right. I mean, you kind of see who the pecking order was and the need for these guys to be in as good a shape as they can be in order to play the snaps that they played. Jenkins, he somehow manages to keep playing more and more snaps, and he's got to be in as good a shape as possible in order to do that, and while staying healthy and and not having to come off the field after 1 or 2 plays. So like training camp can be different things. Like he's not going to be a guy that needs to work on a lot of skill or technique. He needs to be a guy that he's not going to get any better with those. He needs to be a guy that can be in as good as athletic shape as possible to, make his impact for the team.
to not make concessions to age, and yeah,
Right.
I agree, and I don't think from a skill perspective, well, and there have been good examples like Ted Washington and others who've lasted well into their late 30s as nose tackles. Tommy Nobis, I guess, was that kind of player. Um, all right, the ideal position for me for Jenkins this next year is he finds a new running mate. I think the Ravens will have probably dropped the ball if they don't get Travis Jones a different guy that he plays almost every snap with. Madubuike and Jones played almost every snap together. So that was a very, very formidable tandem in the latter part of 23 and pretty much all of 24. And it'd be best if I think if they get either a nose or a 3 to play with Jones, but I'm actually fairly agnostic at this point. I'd be perfectly happy if Jones moved to a 3 tech and the Ravens go really big inside, provided they can get a very talented nose tackle who brings a little bit more than just run defense to the group, and obviously would have years with the team to look forward to.
Right, exactly. Like this is going to be a big off season. I think they're going to sign a veteran defensive lineman, and I think they're going to draft one. And finding a guy to be able to come close to coming back on, kind of replace the production that you're going to lose with Madubuike. Obviously, you're probably not going to find somebody that's going to be as good as he was. But if you could get somebody 70%, on the market or as a draft pick, that would be great. And Travis has really just emerged, especially in the second half of this year, as a dominant force inside, and it's exciting to see. He's probably, I would argue, he's probably the most complete defensive lineman since Nada. The way he's emerged this year,
maybe Campbell or somebody like that, but yeah, I would agree. Nada's probably the guy.
Yeah. I mean, this guy's he's dominant. He's been dominant against the run his entire career, and now he's really added pass rushing moves, and the ability to get pressure inside is part of his repertoire. And I mean, it's exciting to see, and it's exciting that we were able to re-sign him for another 3 years. So he's going to be here for a while.
He led the team in sacks with 5 this year, and I still think most Ravens fans don't really understand how dominant he is as a pass rusher and how much the Ravens pass rush is centered on him. I mean, just the fact that he commands double teams is what gives other people singles. If you put him in a position, if you stunt, you twist, or you have him at the 3 tech where it's harder to double because you got to really bring that right tackle usually involved with the right guard to get it done. If he gets a solo matchup, I mean, it's just not good news for the guard. I can't imagine being a guard and wanting any part of that in terms of what he brings. The man is absolutely enormous when you see him in person. I'll just say that he weighs only 341 pounds, which made him like the smallest of the Ravens' 4 nose tackles this last year. But he's very muscular and built top to bottom, like you'd like. His snaps have really increased dramatically. He played 38.9% of the snaps in 23, up to 57.6% in 24. And this last year, I felt like they were really overworking him at the end of the year as he played 65.4% of the snaps. The Ravens played a ton of defensive snaps for starters. They had a really lousy offensive snap count for the year. And so to play him 65% of the 0.4% of the time means you're playing him a lot of consecutive snaps. The last game at Pittsburgh, he played all but 2 snaps in the second half.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it goes to show how desperate they were, first as an entire team, trying to play catch up from the poor start of the season to try and get it on a run, and you're just getting your best players on. But it also goes to show how thin they were on the defensive line, where they don't have many impactful players, due to the fact that, they haven't been drafting players or putting, a lot of money on, veterans that you're signing. You're signing a lot of kind of pretty much veteran minimum or slightly above guys. So with that, you can't expect to make a lot of impacts with players unless you just hit on a guy that's, got it, 1 foot out the door and this is his last chance. And so it also just shows how desperate they were to get their best players and get the most out of their best players.
I mean, I think that's certainly true. In terms of they want to get every great player they had on the field for every snap they possibly could, including some additional risk at positions like quarterback and um, slot corner. With Hamilton, they took additional injury risk with some of their best players. But I mean, honestly, it's not like they really underspent at the position. They spent some draft capital on Travis Jones. That was a while back, but then they just re-signed him to what I think is an outstanding contract. And the Madubuike issue just looms over the defensive line productivity entirely. I don't think it's fair to say the Ravens didn't spend at the position. They did end up shorthanded, but I don't think it's fair to say they didn't spend at the position. They needed one more player, either a draft pick or somebody they brought in as a free agent who could have contributed in 25, even if not Madubuike had been healthy.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So.
So let's see. Good stuff. I mean, Travis Jones missed 1 game due to injury. He's had more injury problems certainly in the past. Missed tackle rate of 8.5% is above the league average. One thing I like to look at is how many defensive wins he has compared to missed tackles. A 28-4 relationship is outstanding at 7-1 for a defensive lineman. That's a snaps where the offense does not keep up with the sticks in terms of defensive wins. Think of it as successes if you look at that sort of thing. What would you expect from Travis Jones next year? What do you want to see from him?
I would love to see just kind of him repeat this this ascension that he's had in the second half of the year. I would hope that they draft more, and they'll probably have to sign a veteran so maybe you reduce your snaps a little bit. But if he could play 55% of the snaps, but really go all out on those 55, and you find that tandem inside, on passing downs that that neither one of them can be blocked one-on-one. I mean, I think you're really improving your pass rush and your sack total from this past year.
Right. I think it'll be largely the early down pass rush that will be helped by a pairing, because that whoever plays with him, if it's at nose tackle, is just going to play first and second down. If it's a 3 tech, it could be a guy who's on there for all 3 downs. But that's the more expensive, whether you go to the free agent market or whether you expend draft capital. That's the more expensive position. Easily, it could get a 3rd round nose who could give them something special and still play next to Travis Jones and have Travis move to the 3 tech. There are, the Travis Jones situation is remarkable. They got him cheap originally in the draft at number 76.
Mm-hmm.
Then he had a service time snafu that was similar to the Bateman situation, which allowed him to be re-signed for years. He had a grievance filed against the Ravens, apparently, and it was the situation being what it was. It really encouraged a solution from both sides. I think it was a great divisible benefit situation. I just hope there's not does not appear like he's felt abused by the Ravens in the situation, because he immediately after signing the big deal, he's played some of the best ball actually probably the best ball he's ever played.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is probably, and kind of similar to Bateman, after, maybe a year or two, they might even revisit to extending him again on probably a more fair market deal than the one that he signed this year. Because
right.
if he plays the entire year the way he played the second half of the season, he's tremendous value, and he's probably top 5 defensive tackles in all of the league.
Oh yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, and you're paying $25 million plus for that. So I definitely think this is something that could be revisited after a year or two. to keep him here and keep him happy.
I'd be excited by a deal like that. If he plays at that level and they extend him from 2 more years to 5 more years because of it, with significant additional dollars attached to that, I'd be all for that. I was very high on the Bateman deal though, also when it occurred, because it seemed like it was very cheap and Bateman was coming off his best year yet in 24, where he'd set the Ravens record for receivers, for touchdown percentage and yards per target. And then Bateman fell off the table this last year. We need to get him back. I think we will. I think part of the thing, I don't want to go too far down the Bateman road, but I think the extended plays from Lamar were not as prevalent this last year. So if they have some offensive line help and they're able to have more extended plays, and actually some of it is on his health as well, not to blame him, but he needs to be able to move around the pocket. And when those extended plays return, Bateman will be one of the guys. Isaiah Likely was one of the guys, and he might not be here.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. Yeah, I think the whole offense got turned upside down with the injuries to Lamar, and Bateman was one of the ones that just suffered the most. Him and Likely.
Yeah. All right, let's move on. Talk a little bit about Brent Urban. The remarkable at this point career of Brent Urban, where he's returned so many times. He's Lazarus here in terms of his ability to come back, but they always seem to have him on speed dial, and that might be the case again this next year. There'll be a new coaching regime, but DaCosta and Kakinas and people like that, Kakinas, I'm not sure which way you pronounce it, but those two guys are obviously still around and are very likely to have Urban's contact information close at hand. It would not surprise me again if he's back. Didn't have a bad year at all, and he's one of the real flexible components of that defensive line. The 4 nose tackles and him were a lot of the activations down the stretch. And he played 5 tech, he played 3 tech, he played a lot of uncovered end. So it's usually done from a 5 tech position, not from a 6 or 7, but from a 5 tech where he's just on the outside shoulder of that tackle. But he's effectively acting as an edge setter in that sort of defense. And it also gives you the possibility to run up other bodies outside him on that side, whether that might be Hamilton or Buchanan or Simpson or whoever it might be.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think he is just one of those guys that is just truly a Raven player. He's not as good as he was, early in his career, obviously, but his versatility to kind of play, basically, the 5 tech, 3 tech, even be outside as an outside linebacker and give you quality snaps. He's not really a liability. He doesn't have the pass rush moves that he had before. He's not, that pressure guy, but he's still solid against the run. That's exactly what you want him for. That's exactly what you need him for. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if he is back in, after training camp, or, at some point in the season, he gets signed and comes on to play some meaningful snaps for them again this year.
I say one thing about him, he's the ultimate handshake guy. So he's in and out of the roster whenever you need him, but his snaps have been remarkably consistent over the years despite that. So they always seem to rely on, they always seem to need him. And he's kind of the ultimate reinforcement when needed. And he provides that fungible roster spot. He's been a handshake guy for, I think, 3 of the last 4 years effectively. Started on the practice squad this year. 22 and 23, I believe he was a handshake guy both years. And then 24, he actually had a roster spot that they kept him for.
Mm-hmm.
But it allows the Ravens to make full use of their non-season ending IRs they like to have, the IR DTRs, where they get them onto the roster at the start of camp because they think they might be back at the end. Sometimes those work out, by the way, and sometimes they don't. But they have had the Ravens are well known for trying to manage their roster for mid-season reinforcements. And 2 of the nice ones from this year were Aeneas Washington, who's actually a pup guy, and Tavius Robinson, who came back after an injury that was fairly, well, I don't know how many weeks it lasted, but he came back and helped the team a lot at the end in terms of picking up important snaps.
Right, exactly. And
Every day, companies you've never heard of are making millions off your personal data. Your name, address, phone number, even details about your family are pulled from public records on the internet, then sold without your consent. There's an entire marketplace built on your privacy, and most people have no idea it exists. Aura fights back. Aura removes your personal data from broker sites and keeps it off. Aura also alerts you fast if your information shows up in a breach or on the dark web. But Aura is more than just a data broker removal system. It's a full digital security suite that protects every part of your online life. Aura gives you a VPN to stay private, antivirus to block threats, a password manager for safer logins, and spam call protection to shut down scammers. Aura scans the dark web for your most sensitive information and notifies you instantly if anything is exposed. And if your identity is ever stolen, you're backed by up to $5 million in insurance and 24/7 US-based fraud support. Other service charges about the same, but only cover one or two areas. Aura gives you everything: data broker removal, identity and credit monitoring, device protection, and fraud support, all in one simple app. Aura removes what's already exposed, protects what's not, and puts you back in control. Go to aura.com/remove for complete digital protection and peace of mind. That's aura.com/remove.
Let me tell you about the online cannabis company that's changing the game, Mood.com. They created an entirely line of functional gummies, 100% federally legal THC blends discreetly delivered right to your doorstep. And here's the best part. You can get 20% off your first order at Mood.com with the promo code RAVENS. Now, I've tried a bunch of their gummies myself. Each one's totally unique. The Sleepy Time gummies knock me out right away. They help me unwind fast, leave me refreshed the next morning. The Epic Euphoria gummies, they're perfect for when your day just isn't going the way you want it to go. What makes Mood special is how they pair the THC with natural herbs and adaptogens. You won't find blends like this at any local shop. They've got gummies designed for focus, relaxation, clarity, even energy, all made from cannabis grown on small, family-owned American farms. No pesticides, no shortcuts, just high-quality weed you can trust. Plus, Mood backs everything with a 100-day satisfaction guarantee. So head on over to Mood.com, check out their amazing selection, and don't forget to use the promo code RAVENS at checkout to save 20% off your first order.
He's just a break glass in case of emergency type of guy. He stays in shape, and he's right there when you need him, and he knows the scheme. I guess thinking partially depending on what kind of defensive scheme you're going to be running with the new coach, that could kind of determine his fate as well a little bit. But I think he's a guy that he's just a solid veteran that's dependable, and you just love to have him around in case of emergencies.
Absolutely. Okay, let's move on. Broderick Washington, he's actually signed through 2026, but he lost the season in week 3 after playing just 102 snaps. So as you can see, that the Ravens injury problems all kind of hit them at the same time with Madubuike and Broderick Washington and whatnot. He has been probably, I would say, a mild disappointment since being signed to the extension. The Ravens, it seemed like a really good deal at the time, for Broderick Washington, his ascension. I think when he signed the deal, he just had 6 passes defensed at the line of scrimmage in the previous year. So from that standpoint, that it seemed like a good deal. Now there's only 4 guys on the team the Ravens have any appreciable amount of value if they cut, and he's one of them with $4.0 million of cap savings from cutting him. Any way he plays for the Ravens in 26?
I think there's no way, unless he comes back on a veteran minimum deal. I think he's a guy that you just kind of have to move on from, and it's really disappointing. This is really one of those early extensions that the Ravens have given out that didn't work out, not because of injury, but because of just kind of declining skill of the player. A lot of these extensions that don't work out, you think about like Peta, but that was due to injury. This is a player that we thought was kind of ascending, and was a really solid fourth defensive lineman, and it's just gone. He's just declined ever since, and it's a disappointment to kind of see him go the way it has. I have no doubts he's going to be cut. And depending on, he might have played his last snaps in the NFL just with the injuries and just the declining skill.
Yeah, I wouldn't. Unfortunately, I probably think there's a reasonable chance of that. Maybe he gets another chance somewhere, and maybe the Ravens have him on speed dial because he could be a guy who could come in at the vet minimum at some point during the year. But I don't think he has a spot here to start. Let's move on. CJ Okoye, finally added to the 53-man roster. To give you a little bit of background, he played 2 full years on the Chargers practice squad. It's always been a case where he's been an IPPP guy, and the teams that look for the international pathway players to get a free spot on the roster, on the practice squad for him. But they don't on the roster, and they don't on the 90. So you have a 90-man roster during the summer before you make your cuts. And CJ Okoye takes a spot there. But 90 is a lot. You can choose from that. You're not really too desperate for spots generally there. You have guys at the bottom of the roster who you know are not going to make it. On the 53, of course, those spots are gold, so you can't give those away. But on the practice squad, you also have rules. You have so many veterans you can have. I think it's only 4 veterans you're allowed to have. And then you can have up to 16 total players, and you get a 17th if you have an international pathway program player. And so Okoye was a guy the Ravens were eager to keep. And I think it actually influenced the decision to for Jason Jones, for example, to move on to another team. Might have influenced it from either the Ravens position or from Jones's position. But Jones was a rookie out of Auburn last year, and was a guy I kind of liked. But the Ravens just didn't have a spot for him.
Yeah, this is a guy that I was really intrigued at. Looking at him in training camp, I mean, my goodness, he is just a massive human being. I mean, he's up there with Falele with how big he is.
Mm-hmm.
And the disappointing thing is you kind of always, like we talked about earlier, you kind of always see him on the exercise bike and not out there on the field.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a guy that I would like to see him come back. He looked like he could give you some quality snaps at the beginning of the season. And, for whatever reason, he kind of fell out. He just kind of fell off and wasn't as effective. And I think he was getting deactivated a lot at the end of the season. But he's a player that I think if he can get himself into good shape, he could be an absolute solid backup defensive tackle, either at nose or I think most likely at nose tackle, to be able to kind of give some depth to this team.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly at nose tackle is his spot, unless you want to go to some form of multiple nose tackle defense, which means he's really still playing nose, even if he's in a 3 tech. That you want a couple of immovable objects along the line. That's worked for the Ravens in the past when they had Adams and McCrary in the Adams and Siragusa in the 4-3. That really helped the Ravens linebackers flow to the football, and I think it did help this year. I just don't think the Ravens are going to use it as a regular thing. And a player like Okoye is actually a little bit of a risk on the roster, not because he himself is going to necessarily underperform. He'll be a viable backup lineman on his rookie deal at least. But if you are depending on him, he has the kind of propensity to be inert material. And let me explain what I mean by that. You're using up a roster spot on the guy because of what you believe he might do in the future, or because you're holding on to some hope about the player. The 2 guys who've been on the roster the last 2 years who were kind of fit that bill, one was David Ojabo. And the Ravens have been betting on who Ojabo is and his future for basically his entire career as a Raven. But he really did nothing this year. I mean, in terms of being on the field, in terms of, he was a 4th outside linebacker at a position the Ravens were desperate, to have a 4th healthy body at, and they still really didn't want to play him at that point. And then he was a 5th, and I'm like, why the hell would we have this guy active over other choices that are being made, like only having 4 defensive linemen for some of these games?
Right. Mm-hmm.
So Okoye, unfortunately, because he's a guy who plays fewer snaps per game, and towards the end of the season, he played 38 snaps. I think it was against Houston early on. So his first game was against Kansas City, and he played a fair number of snaps. And then they played a good number of snaps against Houston, and then his snaps kind of declined in the second half of the season. The conditioning thing leads me to the inference that his conditioning was forcing him to hit kind of a rookie wall. And he's not a rookie, and he is a rookie, but he's been around the NFL for 3 years now. He should be in good enough shape to be able to get through an NFL season. But I think there are questions there.
Yeah. It's just he's just a very impressive physical specimen, and you don't want to give up on guys like that. Maybe he could possibly be a like you're saying, a practice squad guy that gets several elevations, something like that. But I don't think this is a guy that you just kind of throw away and kind of move on without.
Well, it'll be a tough question if they have, new draft picks, maybe a signee, and he might be number 6 in a 5-man group potentially when the season starts. They might try and get him through the practice squad, but they might also not be able to. And there might be a claim there from somebody who wants a really big guy who has a little bit of experience now. All right, let's move on. Aeneas Peebles, he was active for the first 5 games, played 67 snaps in those. After week 5, he was only active one time in week 13 versus Cincy, where he played 4 more snaps. The Ravens were using him in a highly situational role. What do you do about Aeneas Peebles? Like if you're sitting down with it as a defensive line coach with Aeneas Peebles at the end of the season, what do you tell him to work on?
Well, you could basically tell him, hey, you need to get bigger. He is by far the smallest defensive lineman that they have, and he's got to really kind of gain a lot of weight in order to be able to hold up against the run a little bit better. But I think what you have is just a guy that's going to be a situational pass rusher. You want him to be able to kind of improve his pass rushing so that, maybe potentially he could be that 3 tech with Jones at the nose. But he's a guy that is strictly a 3 tech. He's not a 5. He doesn't have the athleticism to be 5 or play on the outside. He's not big enough to be a nose. He's strictly a 3 tech guy, and he's an undersized one at that. So his goal needs to be, I need to become as good a pass rusher on the inside as I can be and improve moderately against the run so that I'm not a liability and teams don't run right at me on a 3rd and 5 because I'm so undersized and I'm so poor against the run that they feel that they could do that as well.
This is where the Ravens' next defensive coach might actually play a role in this. He's shown a little bit of pass rush juice in the time he's been out there. So it's not a 0 in that regard. And I think that is what he needs to be good at. More muscular, I would go think. Could put on the good weight. Become more like a Madubuike body, where you're a lot of muscle but a little undersized. That would be fine. The problem oftentimes for a defensive coach is this was true tremendously of the Dean Pease tenure. He didn't like the dime defense because he thought he was going to get caught with his pants down on first down with having a dime back on the field if the other team ran no huddle. That's like so much letting the cart drag the horse. It's not even funny. 3rd down is the high leverage down. You better not tell me that you're worried about losing first down so you're gonna take a reduced success rate on 3rd down. And that's just, it's so opposite of,
sure, yeah,
football math.
Right, absolutely, yeah.
All right. So anyway, hopefully the next coach is not a guy who says, I can't afford to get stuck with Aeneas Peebles on first down and doesn't do that. Let's move on. Taven Bryan, Taven Bryan is a former number 1 draft pick of the Jaguars in 2018. The Ravens had quite a collection of the 2018 first round picks on their roster. I think they had 4 at one point this year. But he also played just 98 snaps on the year. We get a bunch of guys played exactly almost 100 snaps. Played from week 8 to 12. I think he was finally added to the 53 after 3 practice squad elevations. But he's another guy it's difficult to find a spot for because he's a 291-pound defensive tackle.
Right, exactly. He seemed to be the guy that kind of replaced Peebles in the pecking order, but he gave a little bit of pass rushing juice, but it also kind of became obvious that he's not a guy that's going to make that much of an impact. And they found other ways, especially with when Robinson came back and they started moving him inside and also using Jones inside as well. So I think he's a guy that maybe you bring back in training camp to see what you have, but I think he at this point is a journeyman and is kind of filling in where needed when injuries hit any particular team. He might get that call, but I think that's kind of where he is at this point in his career.
Well, maybe a vet practice squad guy again, even for the Ravens this coming year. I mean, they clearly liked him because they had him active over other players. They felt like he was giving them something. Of course, that was this group of coaches. We got another group of coaches coming in next year, so not sure exactly how that's going to look. One other guy who got 3 practice squad activations was Josh Tupou. His second tour of duty with the Ravens. He played well, I thought, in 74 defensive snaps. So another guy who's hanging right around that 100 total. But what was weird to me is at the end of the season, the Ravens had guys at the end of the roster who weren't particularly good. Carl Jones and David Ojabo were both on the 53-man roster. Carl Jones had practice squad elevations left, so you could have activated him from the, using those at least. Ojabo basically was not used, and I really don't know what the strategic plan, the roster building plan for Ojabo is in terms of 26. Whether are they looking to get some sort of offset in a compensatory formula? Because I don't think he would qualify for that. What are they looking for? But anyway, they could not find a way to have Josh Tupou on the game day roster for the big game against the Steelers, and I think that probably was a bad thing in the end.
Sure, exactly. Yeah, like I'm not exactly sure what happened. I think he played pretty well as a run defender, but he's another guy that he's got one specific skill. He's starting to age now. I was surprised to see that he was 32 at this point. And I'm not sure exactly what you're going to do with him. I think you probably hurt yourself a little bit by not having him active against Pittsburgh when you have guys like Jones or Ojabo on the roster. But for whatever reason, they wanted to keep Ojabo on the roster all year for reasons that we'll probably never know.
Or we may find out this offseason or next compensatory draft period will say, oh, well, that was an important offset that the Ravens had. The Ravens rarely do stupid things from a roster management perspective. This was a weird one in terms of, just what's the hope for this guy? And I've told the story several times on the show about how we were really scolded as a group, the media was, for saying bad things about David Ojabo. And rarely did Harbaugh do this, but he said there's people in this circle who have said some terrible things about David Ojabo. And I try to. The first thing you do is you're thinking, okay, I didn't say anything, did I? And I never used the word bust, that's for sure. But there are other people in that circle who certainly would have, and without compunction, who have done it. But then he gets activated. He finally, gets back on the roster. He's ready to play and whatnot. And, he plays 6 snaps or, he's a healthy scratch for 3 straight weeks or whatever it might be. And you got to go, oh, really? Now let's revisit that moment where you're telling us all that we're all being unfair to David Ojabo.
Mhm. Yeah.
All
He,
right.
one thing I do respect is he protects his players, even
Yeah.
the ones that are underperforming, unless they're just egregious about, whatever behavior has them not doing well. He is loyal to his players. I'll give him that.
It is a big positive, and that's a good recruiting factor about playing for John Harbaugh is I think a lot of players really do like it, given that they get protection. All right, let's talk about how they're going to approach this offseason. To me, one of the biggest things is getting younger. Where are you on that?
I absolutely think one of their big mistakes has not been addressing the defensive line these last 3 years. I'm always of the opinion you always draft offensive linemen every year, and you always draft defensive linemen because they're the ones that they are the core of your team. You win games in the trenches, and these are the guys that any given season can also get hurt, and you need as many good players on the defensive line as possible. So the fact that they've only drafted one in the last 3 years, and that being a 6th round pick in Peebles, when especially last year when that was the best year for defensive linemen in years, and you wait until the 6th round to draft one, thought was a pretty big mistake there. So
Yeah. What do you think caused that? Because we were together on draft night, if I recall correctly, and we certainly talked as the 3 days the draft were going. It almost seemed like the draft was so deep at defensive line, and yet the Ravens were always chasing value all the way down. And I guess there probably were other teams that just also hadn't had a defensive lineman of any note that they brought in the draft in years because it'd been so weak. The COVID years really just sapped the hell out of the defensive line strength. And it's taken until 2025 to really have a great defensive line draft again, which is extremely frustrating, just extremely frustrating.
Yeah, and I wonder if they were just trying to manipulate the board, and teams that maybe they expected would pass on a defensive lineman ended up drafting one, or ones where I know several teams drafted multiple defensive linemen in this draft, and so maybe they didn't expect that, and so they just kind of kept waiting and waiting for somebody to fall into and to find that proper value for whatever draft pick they was. But I mean I think it was I think it was a mistake for them to wait that long. There was plenty of players out there that could have helped this team this year. I mean, especially considering, I think he's a developmental guy. Like you probably think that coming out of the draft, like he's a 6th round pick. He's a guy that, might have some potential, but it's probably limited on how much he could have helped you this year. And
Right.
to find not to have somebody else earlier that could really play some, decent snaps was a mistake.
You make a great point on Peebles, and I think do the Ravens need to philosophically make a choice there? Because for years they've gone with exactly 5 defensive linemen. Most games you want 5 defensive linemen active, so you can go down to your practice squad and get a guy a few times a year, but you're really banking on some significant help. Do the Ravens need to be a team that carries a 6 defensive lineman in order to have a guy like Peebles even on the roster at all, where you're trying to develop him? And he's got to be on the 53, but you might not want him active on every game day.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that they might have to do this year is, just to get this group younger, have somebody be able to, provide some snaps, because this is it was an aging defensive line last year. You're coming into this year with a 36-year-old nose tackle. I think it's probably a mistake to expect him to be able to play as many snaps as he's played the last 3 years, even though for some reason he's going Benjamin Button with this getting younger and playing more snaps as he ages, which is
Right.
kind of weird. But I think this has got to be a year where you really attack the defensive line. I think you have to sign a veteran. I wondered if that's a veteran nose tackle so that you could maybe have Jenkins be the backup, or kind of figure that out. But I think you need to find a decent veteran, and I think you really have to inject some youth in this. Draft one and probably 2 defensive linemen, though.
Yeah, I'm with you entirely, but I think it does mean that they're going to have to decide that they can carry 6, and they have to decide on draft night. So you're because you don't want to spend the draft capital if you don't have any chance to keep the guy, even if he's just camp insurance for a body and whatnot, unless you know who you're going to cut ahead of time. I'm opposed to that, and it's been I cannot tell you in relative firmness, the fact they've carried 5 defensive linemen has been one of the sure thing bets in roster construction for the last 15 years, I would say, with the Ravens. They really have never carried 6. And they always seem to 5 exactly. If you think about the other positions, tight end, they've carried 2 or 3 or 4 if you include Ricard. So they've had some variation there. They've carried 5 or 6 wide receivers. They've carried anywhere up to 7 cornerbacks at one time. They've carried 5 safeties. You've used an extra guy at inside linebacker because they want the extra special teams big there, and that creates some of the variation between there and tight end, for example, and even outside linebacker to a degree. But they occasionally carried 10 offensive linemen, but the 5 defensive linemen has just been cast in stone for years with this franchise. And I think if you want to really try and get younger, they probably have to be willing to carry 6 and have a developmental guy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
All right. The Ravens have a great history with UDFA DLs. Do you have any tolerance for that come draft night, that they might decide, hey, we're gonna pick up some guys? The problem is they had 3 of them, really, maybe 4 this camp, if you go for it. Jason Jones, who they ended up losing because they kept Okoye. They had Okoye himself, who they brought in from the Chargers. And then they had Nash Hutmaker, who apparently showed up to the facility with a UDFA deal ready to be signed, and did not pass his physical, is the word. And then they let him go, which was, to me, was a bummer. And then he ended up, he might have actually got in a game for Tampa Bay, but he ended up going to Tampa Bay also, where 2 of the Ravens linemen went.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, and I think you absolutely have to draft one. You need to find somebody that is worthy of, picking up some snaps and being an impactful player for you this year. You can't count on undrafted players to be impactful players during the season, this coming season. So I think you absolutely have to draft one. And I think if you only draft one, that's when I think you probably need to go hard on whatever your top, 4 or 5 undrafted guys. You really need to go hard to try to find one out of those 5 in order to, just bring some youth into this line here.
Completely agree. And that's, I think, the strategy exactly that I would do. I think it's going to be a high round pick on a defensive lineman. I would expect a day 1 or day 2 pick that they'll expend, just because to get real quality, I think you need to go there. It would not shock me if it's the first round pick that's used on defensive linemen. So we'll see how that plays out. Now, the other source they potentially have is they could go to the free agent market and see if they could find somebody. I try and avoid spending money when possible. I'm not sure it's possible on this offensive line or this defensive line to do that.
Yeah. So, with them being so, kind of set in stone with these 5 defensive linemen, if I were to put the over under at, let's say, 2.5 for new additions to the defensive line, would you go over or under?
So, well, let's see for a second. So Travis Jones is returning.
Yep.
And
you got Peebles, you got
Okoye and Jenkins. I'd still say under. I think 2.
You
So
still think
I think it'll be 1 draft pick, 1 free agent, 1 draft pick, 1 UDFA, or 2 draft picks. One of those 3.
All right. Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if it's 3. Just because I think it'll be 1 draft pick. I think they do sign a veteran, and
Let's be clear here: 3 make the roster, or 3
make three make the final roster. Yes.
Oh, I'll bet against that.
Okay.
I'll bet against that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll have a beer. We'll bet a beer on something there.
All right. That sounds good. But Brandon, it's always great talking football with you. And this is an interesting group to talk about. Obviously, an area where you have a lot of expertise. Tell folks where they can talk football with you online.
Sure. I'm on Twitter at bcroxton99. Love talking Ravens. Excited about this new chapter. It's, both mixed emotions, like I'm sad to see Harbaugh go, but I think it was time, and I'm, excited for this next chapter, and hopefully we'll pick the right guy to kind of lead us and get us to the promised land. All
right. Other folks out there, thanks so much for listening. As always, we'll be shifting over in about a couple of weeks to a mix of other content, including some off-season strategy shows. We got a great show coming up for you on a little bit of the math of the final game against the Steelers. That have a young man who put together some tremendous work on that we'll hopefully look for it next week in terms of the math of the kneel. It would be. And otherwise, hit me up, #FilmStudy mailbag for your questions. I'll try and either do a 1 to 3 minute video or get them on the appropriate show, whether that's Friday Morning GM. I know a lot of your questions end up going there, or one of these positional review shows, quite possibly over the next couple of weeks. Brandon, thanks again for coming on.
Thanks, Ken.
And we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.